Too Big to Fail: The Inside Story of How Wall Street and Washington Fought to Save the Financial System and Themselves, by Andrew Ross Sorkin. In 2008, Wall Street was facing a financial crisis. It started with the smallest of the big five investment banks coming forward to express their concern that they were about to either go bankrupt or be sold as a result of the subprime mortgage collapse. If the smallest of the big five was in trouble, it was not hard to assume that the fourth largest could be next. With stocks plummeting and all of the big five banks facing bankruptcy or worse, something needed to be done to protect an institution that had been in place since 1850. In Too Big to Fail: The Inside Story of How Wall Street and Washington Fought to Save the Financial System and Themselves, Andrew Ross Sorkin breaks down the near collapse of Wall Street and what was done to save the financial system following the collapse of the subprime mortgage market. How Too Big to Fail breaks down to financial crisis that hit Wall Street and Washington. This is a look at the 2008 financial crisis that includes a look at the men and women who were at the heart of the problem. At the same time, we get details about what went wrong, what steps went into trying to avert a complete collapse of Wall Street, and the ultimatum that finally ended the disaster, as Washington made it clear that all the banks involved would take funds whether they were needed or not. Not only do we learn about all the key players involved in both the crisis and averting the financial collapse, but we also see all the ways that Wall Street went wrong in their decision-making. Key points. The fate of the economy was in the hands of a group of fallible individuals. During the financial crisis in 2008, a handful of people, all of whom were capable of making mistakes, were in charge of the fate of the economy. Things really began to unfold after a single phone call to the Lehman Brothers CEO, Richard S. Fuel, Jr., from Henry Paulson, the Treasury Secretary. Paulson was trying to alert Fold to the news that the smallest of the big five banks was on the brink of bankruptcy. Paulson was concerned that Lehman Brothers would be next, and it didn't take long for Fold to grow concerned as the bank's own stocks began to drop. In an effort to protect the bank, Fold attempted to negotiate a sale to groups such as Bank of America and Korea Development Bank. The sale failed, and negotiations fell apart. Lehman Brothers ultimately collapses even with a warning from Washington. Even with the warning from Paulson, Lehman Brothers found itself collapsing without a sale. By September of 2008, Paulson determined that Lehman Brothers had to file for bankruptcy. The goal was to show that the continual risks that Fold and his Wall Street competitors had made came with consequences. Prior warnings about the risks that he was taking went ignored by Fold, who chose to have the firm borrow even more money over the years in an effort to pursue deals that were increasingly risky. This decision ultimately backfired on Fold and Lehman Brothers. While the borrowing and risk may have been in Fold's favor when the stock market was prospering, once it began to crash, there was no safety net in place. Lehman Brothers was not the only Big Five bank crashing. Even as Lehman Brothers was crashing, Paulson realized that another one of the big five banks was in trouble. Merrill Lynch was in trouble too. The CEO and chairman of Merrill Lynch, who had only been hired in 2007, ultimately sold the firm to Bank of America in an effort to save it from the crash of its competitors. However, they were not alone in being in trouble. As the financial crisis spread, American International Group, AIG, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs found themselves crashing as well. And while there were attempts to salvage each of these banks and the insurance group through mergers and buyouts, they didn't have the ability to properly value certain aspects of each institution. Because they were unable to assign proper values to different aspects of each company, sales were unable to happen. Inevitably, there were very few deals to be made. The big five banks were not alone when it came to financial trouble. Even as the big five banks were failing, Paulson found himself with more issues to contend with, thanks to two major mortgage companies, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. During the housing boom, these government-sponsored entities took on risks that were unsustainable. If these two mortgage companies failed, it could be a cataclysmic disaster as they were both backed by American taxpayers. Ultimately, Paulson arranged a takeover of both mortgage companies that was approved by President George W. Bush. This takeover put Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae in the control of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. There was some hope that this move would help to stabilize the financial market. Panic on Wall Street was starting to have a global effect. With Wall Street unable to contain their panic, it was beginning to have an effect on the world's economy. This led to the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Timothy Geithner, to step in as part of every discussion moving forward. Not only did he have talks with all of the bank executives, but he was also involved in all discussions held with Paulson and his staff in regards to any policy changes or possible mergers. While the SEC representative, Christopher Cox, deferred to Geithner, the FDIC rep, Sheila Bair, was barely tolerated by Geithner, who apparently felt that she had a hand in causing turmoil in the markets. It's time to bring the president in on the plan to save the financial system. Paulson and the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, made the decision to brief President Bush on their plan to stop the financial crisis. This plan included giving AIG an $85 million line of credit that would be given in exchange for an ownership stake in the company. However, this was not enough to stop the crisis. More intervention was needed. The plan created by Paulson and his team was named Break the Glass and would have the government buying $700 billion of toxic assets from the banks. In September, the bill was put before Congress but failed by a vote of 228 to 205. However, once tax breaks were added to the bill, which was known as Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, as well as raising the FDIC insurance on accounts to $250,000, the bill passed. On October 3rd, the president signed into law the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008. In the end, a $700 billion bailout was given to 9 banks, whether the money was needed or not. While some people asked whether all of the deals made and panic was what averted the crisis, the author himself feels that it would all have been for nothing if the government had not taken the time to regulate the irresponsible risks that had been taken by the different financial institutions. In summary, long before 2008, the financial crisis hit critical mass. There were warnings about the dangers of the risks being taken. Even as Wall Street attempted to decrease risk by trying new things, they only made things worse over time. By 2008, the Big Five banks were in major trouble that in some cases could not be solved. Even as the financial institutions tried to find solutions to their issues, they could not successfully find investors or sales because there was no way to assign proper value to the different aspects of the financial companies. Government intervention was required to save Wall Street and the financial system on a global scale. Not only did the government have to take over the mortgage companies Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, but they also had to bail out the banking industry on the whole, which involved an infusion of cash in the excess of $700 billion.
Hi, I'm Rhonda, and this is an exclusive audiobook video recorded for the Audiobook Master Channel. Enjoy your audiobook and have fun learning. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button so you'll get updated on our next upload. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up and say your thoughts about the book we just covered. Do you want to listen to a summary or review of a book that we haven't covered in the past? Say it in the comments below or send us a message. Don't forget to check our other uploads. Enjoy listening!